Hi, this is Peter McLaughlin, BlueSky Hypnosis, and welcome to Friday Live at 5. Today we are talking about releasing spiritual attachments. And before we get into that, my standard talk for those regulars who come back week after week, and God bless you guys, thank you for showing up, is make sure if you have questions, make sure if you have comments that you share those with the group. It makes this presentation into something other than a presentation and more like a conversation, which makes it way more interesting. Way more interesting for me, and I trust way more interesting for the people that are tuned in around the world. There are definitely things that people will talk about. They'll ask questions, or they'll challenge me, or they'll make a statement, and it gets me thinking. It gets me thinking about things that I otherwise wouldn't have said. It's literally like a real conversation as opposed to a monologue. So please, 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 feel free to make comments, to ask questions, and what I do is I just kind of salt through them quickly because I know that, I don't want to disrupt the flow of what's going on. Someday I'll have somebody help me. And I try to pick the ones without even reading the whole thing. I try to pick ones that, not the same person every time if possible. It just depends on how many questions are asked. And also, if you have ideas about future broadcasts, about future Live at 5s, because I'm doing this every week, 5 o'clock Eastern US, please suggest those. I've already incorporated a number of them into the lineup. Some I've already done. So please, consider making those suggestions. They're certainly well appreciated. So today, without further ado, releasing spiritual attachments. In order to really talk about this, I guess we first have to talk about what is an attachment. So we're talking about energy here, right? The way I think about things is that we have a physical body. And kind of like religion teaches, we don't just have a physical body, but we also have what religion would call a soul, or other people would call a spirit. Now this is totally energetic, so it's not like you can go, aha, I'm gonna put my finger on that thing, and I'm gonna see it in an MRI machine. But these two pieces fuse together for this lifetime, which is called our human existence, and when we die, the body goes away and the spirit goes on. So when my kids were little, I remember having this conversation with them when I was driving them to school. And it just kind of washed over me that all the other cars out there are like the bodies of people. That's what we see, that's sort of what we interact with. But the driver is the soul, the driver is the spirit. And now, most people in their lifetime, if they live in a place which is sort of car-centric, are going to have way more than one car in their lifetime. They may have 5 or 6 or 7 cars in their lifetime. And those cars may not all be the exact same model and the same color. They may be wildly different. From a minivan when you have kids to a sports car when you're having your midlife crisis. And it doesn't mean that the driver has changed. The driver is still largely the same being. It's just from the outside it looks dramatically different. Okay, so a spiritual attachment is an energetic attachment that attaches to either your body or probably more like your energetic body, sometimes called your ethereal body. When this happens, all kinds of weird stuff occurs, and we're going to get into specifically what happens when you have an attachment. Now, what is an attachment? So please take everything I say with a grain of salt. So I guess I should just say this every single time. I'm not an MD. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a licensed psychotherapist. I'm a life coach and a hypnotist. And I've been working on this stuff for 14 years. That's where the most amount of my information comes from, is working in the field with thousands of people. All right, so when a person dies, when their physical body ceases to exist, there's this energetic piece. Call it a soul, call it a spirit, call it something else, doesn't really matter. Now, that energetic part of us appears to be destined to go somewhere else. Now, people call it going toward the light. When I say people call it this, what I'm referring to are people who have experienced near-death experience, NDE. You can look this up for yourself if you want to get more information on it. These are people who, in a clinical setting, they're hooked up to machines. It can monitor their brainwaves, monitors their heartbeat, and other vital symptoms. These are people who are clinically dead for anywhere from, say, 30 seconds. It could be 5 minutes or more. And then they're revived. It could be with an external defibrillator, or it could be with some other mechanism, their heart gets going again, their brain waves get going again. But while they're in this state of what science would call death, no brain waves, no heartbeat, about 40% of these people, according to estimates, return to life when they're revived, and they describe a period of consciousness. And one of the more common things that they seem to describe is moving through a dark tunnel with light at the end of the tunnel. And when they get to the end of the tunnel, my uncle actually had a near-death experience, and he told me the exact same thing. It was wild. And he said what many of these people say, which is they've never felt so much love in all of their life as when they come through this tunnel into the light. And in the light, and this is what maybe we call heaven, or we call the afterlife, or we call Valhalla or Eden, or a million other names for it. But when they get there, what most of these people describe is, like my uncle did, never feeling so much love. And they talk about how, and my uncle was the same way, they don't want to come back because it feels so good to them. In any event, let's say that the overwhelming majority of spirits take this journey. They leave this physical plane on this earth, they leave their body behind, and they go on a journey similar to what I'm describing. Okay, what's an attachment? An attachment is a spirit that doesn't leave this plane, that stays on this plane. And from the work that I do with people, and from reading books, there are a number of reasons why this may be the case. What I have found is it's often that the person who has become deceased and their spirit doesn't leave is afraid of what comes next. So they may be an atheist and they think that what comes next is oblivion, and what they know here on this planet is at least sort of comfortable, even though they don't have a body, and so they don't go. Or they may be very religious and they may think because of things that they've done in their life or things they haven't done that they're going to go to hell. And they certainly don't want to do that, and so they hold on to this plane and they think, well, this must be safer than where I would go next. Another reason could be that they feel tremendous guilt or a tremendous attachment to someone who's still here, and they feel like somehow if they stay, that they can be of service to a person, say, that they left behind. It could also be, and I think that this may be, this is just my supposition, that it may be a haunted house is they worked so hard to produce this physical wealth, maybe embodied by a home, that they just don't want to leave it. Now, it seems to be that the law of free will, and we'll talk about this later, I'm going to make a note here to myself, that the law of free will is preeminent in the universe. In other words, no one can be made to do anything spiritually that they don't want to do. So no one can force these spirits to go from the earth plane to whatever comes next. So if they choose to stay, they get to stay. Now here's where the attachment piece comes in. Because this planet, at least as far as we understand it, seems to be a dense physical place. And because their experience on this planet is like yours and mine, which is you have a physical body to interface, like a computer, we have a keyboard and we have a mouse and we have all of these things to interface with the computer. The interface is the body. When the body goes away, they no longer have an interface. And so they're sort of disconnected from their experience of connecting with the world around them. So what they do is sometimes they attach to a living human being. And I think that what they're attaching to is they're attaching to the energetic or etheric body. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I'm going to look in the comments and just see if there's anything in here that are, questions or comments that I can just jump into right away. So let me just grab here. All right, so I'm just going to go to Legal Eagle 44. Okay, let's give it a triangle. Legal Eagle is one of our regulars. It's awesome to see you here as always. Peter, some experts say a near-death experience is simply the hallucinations of the brain experiences as it breaks down. Yep, I've heard that too. And so my opinion, and it's actually believed that the pineal gland, which looks like a pine cone, it's very small, and it's between your eyes, exact midpoint of your brain, from all directions. Pineal gland. The pineal gland produces DMT. DMT is the hallucinogenic compound that is found in ayahuasca, the plant medicine that the shamans make in Central and South America. So yes, some scientists, in my opinion, in a desperate effort to describe why a person can have a period of consciousness even when they're dead. Now, keep in mind, science is saying that's not possible. No brain waves, no heartbeat, no consciousness. They say you have to have a brain, you have to have this mechanism in order to have consciousness. So they're kind of throwing that out there as oh my God, if we can't figure out why this is happening, then maybe the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. So I guess this sort of gets into your own experience and your own belief system, which side you're gonna fall on. Are you gonna fall on the scientists saying, well, we don't really know what it is, but we're gonna say that it's the last gasp of a dying brain. Perhaps it's the release of DMT. Now, how do you have a conscious experience according to them if you have no heartbeat and if you have no brain waves? In other words, they can't measure any brain activity. So how the F are you meeting with deceased relatives? How are you meeting with ascended masters? How are you having an awareness, maybe even a conversation with other beings if you have no brainwaves? Now, I gave my lack of credentials a little while ago. Not a doctor, not a licensed psychotherapist. But as a human being, as a thinking human being, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Anyway, great point. Thank you for making it. Let's go on to the next piece, which is, well, I'm gonna look and see if there are any other, all right, so Dana Simmons is saying, what if I ask them to leave the house? I'm gonna come into that a little bit later when we talk about how to release or remove a spirit attachment, because I'm assuming that a lot of folks are going to be interested in that piece just as much as they're interested in the other pieces, but I sort of want to build up to that. So I promise to get to that. Here's one, We Are One. Peter, I mistakenly thought you were just a hypnotist. This is far more interesting, okay? Thank you, We Are One. I appreciate that, I really do. And I think of hypnotism as a tool that a carpenter is going to bring a bag when they're going to build a deck on the back of your house, and they're going to have a lot of different tools in that bag. They're going to have more tools in their truck. And ultimately, one tool is not going to allow them to do everything that they need to do in order to produce what you see in your mind's eye as the goal, this beautiful deck on the back of your house. And P.S., you probably don't care what tools they use as long as you get the end result. I see hypnosis, neuro-linguistic programming, life coaching, experiences I've had in my life, just as tools to help people get from A to Z. So yeah, thanks for that, appreciate it. Let me see here, AW, Anita, is there a certain type of person who is susceptible to spiritual attachments? Perfect, awesome lead in to how you can be vulnerable and get a spiritual attachment. So I'm going to go over those ways right now. And let's get rid of that picture, and we'll put up the one where I was going to talk about how we do this. All right, so I put up a picture of a bottle of alcohol and a couple of cocktails. Why did I do that? I'll tell you. So in English, we would call the family that those beverages fall into, we would call it, probably most people would call it alcohol. Other people might call it liquor. But there's another name that we use in English to describe what that is. And that word is the word spirits. Now, I don't think it's a mistake that we call alcohol spirits. In fact, the word alcohol comes from the Arabic al-kuhl, A-L-K-U-H-L, I think it's something like that, which means body-sucking entity. Now, this makes way more sense to me because I have a greater awareness and understanding of what spiritual attachments are and how you get them. To Anita's question, AW. When you're drunk, your defenses come down. It's like the door to your house is wide open. Some people describe it as your own spirit temporarily just says, this house is disgusting. This house is putrid. I'm leaving. That opens the door and allows a spiritual entity to walk through that door and attach to you. Now, does that mean every time you have a drink, you're going to get an attachment? No. Does it mean that every time that you are stinking drunk, fall down stinking drunk, you're going to get an attachment? No. But that's the time where you're completely out of it, at which you have no more spiritual armor. That is one of the ways that you could become extremely vulnerable. And I've gotten to the point in my practice whereby when I'm working with a client who either currently has a drinking problem or they've had a drinking and or a drug problem in the past, I'm pretty much convinced that they have spiritual attachments. And we're going to start looking for those. And I'll just answer real quickly how we quickly look for that, how we quickly look for an attachment. On my YouTube channel, I have a video. You can look for it under BlueSky Hypnosis on YouTube, and it teaches you how to use a pendulum. A pendulum produces an ideomotor response. Describe the whole thing on this short video. It gives you a yes/no answer to questions. I have the client calibrate the pendulum. In other words, so we know what yes is, their movement for yes, their movement for no, their movement for maybe. This is a good time to ask questions and receive accurate answers, that their higher self is controlling the pendulum, and we just have the client ask, do you have any spiritual entities attached to you and or your body? If we get a hit on that, if we get a yes, we're going to just look for how many. And once we know how many, then we go through the process that I'll talk about a little bit later about how to remove them. So vulnerability, alcohol, especially an alcohol addiction, drugs, especially a drug addiction. You know, use alcohol lightly here and there. I don't think it's probably going to create a problem. But if you get kind of stinking drunk, that could create a problem because now the door is wide open. Does it mean it's going to happen every time you're in that state? No. But that's where you're vulnerable. Again, if your door is wide open, it doesn't mean some crook is going to walk into your house, but it could happen. The second way that you can become vulnerable to a spiritual attachment is in a state of high, intense, negative emotions. So extreme anger, extreme and prolonged depression, extreme and prolonged anxiety or fear, or hatred. All of these emotions can create an opening, if you will, whereby that negative or disincarnated spiritual entity can enter through the door and come inside. The other one would be having intimate relations with someone else. You're kind of commingling not just your physical bodies, but you're commingling your etheric or energetic bodies. And almost like a spiritual STD, that energetic entity could pass from one person to another. In fact, one of the ways that I describe a spiritual attachment is as a parasite, because it's like a physical parasite that gloms onto your GI tract and sort of feeds off of you. An energetic or spiritual attachment is kind of like a parasite that attaches to your energy field and can sort of degrade or feed off you. And just like a physical parasite, it doesn't mean it's going to kill you. It doesn't mean that you can't go about your life. You may not even know you have it, except for different kinds of GI disturbances. The other thing I want to say, and I want to pull down this screen and put up the other one, is I want to quote, where is he? Right here. I want to quote Nikola Tesla, who was the genius of the 20th century, the genius. He said, if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. That everything, even something seemingly solid and physical is really just a bunch of atoms spinning around at a fairly high rate of speed, and the atom itself is mostly space. And what seems to determine, and now I'm getting into a depth that I'm not so great at, quantum physics and so forth, is the speed at which the atoms are oscillating determines the apparent solidity of it. Now, where I'm going with this whole thing is, I talked about alcohol addiction, drug addiction, I talked about sustained emotions like negative emotions like depression, anxiety, fear, hatred, and so forth. All of those conditions would produce a lower vibration, right? So hatred, regret, fear, animosity, a state of non-forgiveness would produce a very low vibration. The opposite would be things like love and forgiveness and compassion and joy. That's going to produce a really high vibration. Now think of who these entities are. And I'm talking about what I run into, right? I mean, I know people talk about demons and so forth. I, thank God, knocking on wood right now, I don't really run into that. Maybe I will, I hope I don't. But I'm running into these disincarnated entities, people like you and me that just no longer have a physical body. And I said they don't go to the light because they're afraid, because they feel guilty or they feel shame or they feel possessive about their physical possessions here on the planet. What are they doing? They're vibrating at a really low frequency. What's going to seem like home to them is someone vibrating at a really low frequency. Somebody who's addicted to drugs or alcohol, or who hates themselves, or who's in a chronic state of depression or anxiety or fear or hatred. That's going to look like home to them. What isn't going to look like home to them is somebody that's vibrating at a very high frequency. So I used to think, oh, you know, you have to surround yourself with white light and you have to call in protection and all these other things. Now, I think there's a place for that. But I actually think the best defense is to just not even be vibrating at that frequency, to keep yourself vibrating at a higher frequency, the frequency, as I said, of love, forgiveness, compassion, joy, all of those things, because they're going to look at you and go, nah, I'm leaving. I have no interest in this. So I hope all of that makes sense. Let me see if there's any other comments here. Here we go. Patricia XXXX. Why, after my husband's dad died, I would be able to smell his aftershave or cigarette smoke? This only happens when I am the only one in the house. Great question. So that sounds a lot like sort of the way people talk about ghosts. And I've definitely had clients talking about this sort of thing. Now, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. It could be that there are certain things that a disincarnated entity that we might call a ghost can affect, something that they can affect. So maybe it has to do with smell. Maybe the advanced ones can move, a pen from one side of the room to the other. I have a lot of people who will talk about electronics, so lights that flicker on and off, they change the bulb, put a new bulb in, flickers on and off, or a radio that hasn't worked in years that turns on. I've even had people tell me that a radio that was unplugged, even when they went over and looked at it, had turned on. So maybe it's things that are closer to the pure energetic spectrum that are vibrating at a higher frequency. I don't know. Maybe smell vibrates at a higher frequency like electricity, whereas a physical object vibrates at a lower frequency. It's more dense. Maybe it's harder for them to affect a change in those. I mean, I'm thinking about the movie Ghost with Patrick Swayze and how he's sort of being taught by another ghost how to move something physical to get the attention of the woman he left behind. When this happens, when a client comes in and they say, and I always ask this question now as a matter of course in my intake, and the first time I meet with people, I want to know about old traumas that they've had. I want to know about the dreams that they've had, even if the dream was 20 years ago, and the weirder the dream, the better. And I want to know about anything that might fall under a paranormal experience. And lots of people, I know the people that come to see me are self-selected, right? Obviously. But so many people that I run into have had experiences like the one you described. And when that's the case, what I would want to do with that client, and what I always do with that client, in the case of your father-in-law, for example, if you had a decent relationship with him, is that may be some kind of a signal or a sign that he wants to connect with you. And in a hypnotic state, you can connect with deceased loved ones energetically. You can feel like you're there with them, having a conversation with them, sort of mind to mind. You can feel all the emotions wash over you. I was working with a client today, 2 hours ago, and she was able to connect with a beloved pet who had died. And when she came out of hypnosis, she said, I felt like that dog was there. I felt like I could feel his fur when I was patting him. I felt like I could feel his, the size of his body and his bone structure and his muscles, and I felt the emotions of him being there. So again, in those cases where a person has a vivid dream about a deceased loved one, or they're suffering from grief, or they have this sort of paranormal experience, I'm thinking, let's go find out. Let's find out, why did you get that sign? And did it come from that deceased relative, or did it, in your case, your father-in-law, or did it come from somewhere else? Hope that helps. Let me see here. Dara. Hello, Dara. As chemical beings, pretty much everything we ingest has an influence on how we think. Really good point. Really good point. I mean, the colloquial saying is garbage in and garbage out. I had the same client I was telling you about that I met with 2 hours ago. I was talking about how good seems to come from good. Things we call bad seem to come from bad. So if you're having negative thoughts, that's going to transmit itself into your body and maybe produce emotional conditions or even physical conditions that are deleterious. If you're thinking really good thoughts, that's going to translate itself into your body, and it's probably going to produce really pleasant and positive emotions, and then translate itself into your physical body after that and become that expression. One of the things that I want to tackle on these Friday Lives is, and I mentioned it I think on the last Friday, that according to Harvard Medical School, you can change your genetic expression by the mental state in which you place yourself. If you do it every single day, and you do it, they said, at least for 12 minutes. That's it. 12 minutes a day, and you change your genetic expression. So yes, the stuff you put in your mouth, the stuff you put on your skin, think transdermal patches. They can deliver medication through your skin. So anything you put on your skin, you might as well be putting in your mouth. All of that is true. And to go beyond that, what you put in through your eyes, what you put in through your ears is also going to affect you. On all levels, we are very sensitive beings. And I think it's really important that we take charge of what we're ingesting from all of these different routes. Not just our mouths and our nose, but also our skin and also our eyes and our ears. So great, thanks for bringing that up, appreciate it. Let's see, Astral Wolf, love that name. I gotta give that a little triangle ring. Okay, Dana, I had the same issues. I had a spirit crossed over by another medium because I wasn't strong enough. And as soon as it crossed over, I feel less tired and sick. Awesome, okay. So let's talk about how these spiritual entities, these attachments can affect you. So Astral Wolf was saying that he or she, I'm not sure which, felt tired and sick when this entity was attached, and when the entity was removed, Astral Wolf is saying that he or she felt less tired and less sick. So yes, like a physical parasite, it could produce feelings of lethargy, feelings like you're not ambitious, or you don't want to do those things that are waiting for you. I'm not saying that's the only reason why you would feel that way, by the way. I'm saying this is one of the things that could happen with an attachment. I think the ones that are the most remarkable are is that it can almost seem to affect your thoughts. Like sometimes you can have thoughts, and I'll have a lot of clients say this to me, and it feels like the thoughts aren't even their own. And when that happens, I'm almost always thinking about an attachment. And my experience is when we remove the attachments, and there may be more than one, that the mind becomes clearer. And usually what they describe is that their physical body feels lighter. You know, they often will finish the session and I'll say, you know, how do you feel right now? And they'll say, my God, I feel so much lighter. I feel like all this weight is off of me. And I feel like that is such a powerful representation of what it's like kind of having a monkey on your back, to have that monkey off your back and not have to drag around that extra heaviness or that extra burden with you anymore. For some people, it's absolutely huge. And just that change alone can often produce a very, very, very palpable result for people. And if anyone is interested here, you know, after this broadcast is over, on my channel on YouTube, BlueSkyHypnosis.com, and remember to, you know, consider subscribing to my channel because my content will start to filter through your feed. If you also click the bell notification icon, you'll be alerted every time I publish something. Anyway, I have a two-part video series on my channel about removing spiritual attachments. So part one describes the phenomenon. I'm describing it probably in greater detail on this broadcast, but part one does describe the phenomenon, and then part two walks you through the process of removing an attachment. And you can read in the comments section about people who have successfully removed attachments, and they will often talk about feeling lighter and so on and so forth. So cool. Thank you to Astral Wolf. Somebody's asking me, who's there on the left? So my left arm is here, but you're probably thinking over here. Stacy Rain. Stacy, maybe you can give some more information here, but you might be super sensitive. Maybe there's someone in the room with me. I can't see that, but you know, if you wanna write in some more information, I'd be happy to take a look at that if I see it come in. Let's see, maybe there is a little bit more here. Oh, wow. Legal Eagle is saying that's Peter's dad. Okay, that's cool. All right, AW, I live in a Victorian cottage and I've seen and heard some strange things. All right, so one of the things that you could do is you could go to that pendulum video, figure out how to use a pendulum, and just ask the pendulum, are there spiritual entities residing in this house? And then make sure that it's not your family, right? Because we're also spiritual entities. So you'd want to ask the question in such a way as, is this a member of my family? Am I able to see them with my physical eyes? Are these people whose bodies have died or passed on? So you could ask questions like that and see if you can get some insight into things. All right, let's go into how to remove these spiritual attachments. Like, what do you do? What's the process? So I mentioned earlier on in this live that it seems to me that if not the most powerful law of the universe, it's got to be right up there, which is the law of free will. That one being cannot force another being to do something without their permission. Now their permission, they may be tricked into giving their permission, or their permission may be tacit. In other words, you don't object. So the example that I like to give my clients when I'm talking about this, before we do a spiritual attachment removal, is I give the example of you're having a block party, and everyone on your block, all your neighbors, have their doors open. Summertime, people, kids coming and going from everyone's houses. They've got tables set up outside, food on the table, food inside, people using the bathrooms. It's like for that day, everyone's house is an open house. Everyone's house is a communal house. Well, it wouldn't be too far of a stretch to say that in a circumstance or situation like that, that some stranger could wander down the street, see people going in and out of these open doorways and just wander into your house and sit down on your couch. Block party ends, person doesn't leave, you don't ask him to leave, and guess what? He legally doesn't even have to leave, because I think that a reasonable person would see all these people coming and going from all these houses with the doors open and think, oh, it's okay for me to come and go too, right? This is sort of a plausible, I know it's not perfect, but bear with me. There's a plausible reason why a person could say, well, it seemed okay for me to do that. And if you theoretically never asked them to leave, they wouldn't have to leave. So that's like not knowing you have this spiritual entity attached to you. Well, when you become aware that you have a spiritual entity attached to you, you would do what the homeowner would do. You'd ask the person to leave. And if they didn't leave, you'd call the cops. And the police would bring as many officers as was necessary to get this person to go. Now, the first thing the police are going to do when they show up is they're going to say to you, are you the homeowner? You're going to say yes. Then they're going to say, is that the person that you told me about? Yes. Did you give them permission to be here? No. Do you want them to leave? Yes. Now, if you started hemming and hawing and say, well, he's such a nice guy and he doesn't really cause a lot of problem, they're going to say, call me back when you're ready. But assuming that you're super clear with the police, they will now ask the person to leave. If they don't leave on their own, they're going to drag them out and they're going to bring as many officers as necessary to get that person out of your house. Think of this as a metaphor for a spiritual entity attached to your body or your etheric body. And the police or the cops in this metaphor would be angels. They would be ascended masters. And it doesn't matter whether you're religious or you're not. If there are negative physical entities, there are positive and loving physical entities. And we want to bring them in just like we would bring in the cops to help us with this situation or circumstance. So, and I'm just telling you how I do this. There may be other people that do it differently. This is how I do it. I have the client, and we talk about it ahead of time so they know it's coming. I have the client call in angels to surround them, right? Their eyes are closed, they're in a hypnotic or semi-hypnotic state, and as we go through this, they're going deeper into hypnosis. They bring these angels in. Angels surround them. Now, they may see the angels with their third eye, that's the pineal gland, remember we talked about that? They may see them clearly, and they may see them dimly, it doesn't matter. They may feel them. They may just know they're there. They may just imagine that they are there. All of it works. Then they call in an ascended master. Now, an ascended master could be someone from a religious tradition in Christianity, Buddhism, it could be from Judaism, it could be from paganism. But you would call in a powerful, loving being, in addition to the angels, who is going to assist you with this process. And just like the cops just don't come to your house every day and say, oh, is there a stranger in your house you want us to remove? You have to do something first. In the United States, you call 911. So you call them in. That's like calling 911. When they come, now you make it clear to them and to the entity that you don't want them in your body. You don't want them in your energy field. That they do not have your permission to be there anymore. That you're invoking your divine right to the sanctity of your body, to the sanctity of your being, and they have to go. And what I've discovered over many years is that this is not purely about force and being forceful. That's one of two components or attitudes that I find the most useful to deploy in the same session. So cops could come into your house and rip somebody out, but isn't it a lot better if they just talk to them and the person walks out on their own? It's better for everyone. That's what we want with these entities. So we want to combine a very clear, forceful approach, and I talk the client through this while they're in hypnosis and they've got the angels around them, they've got the ascended master there, to tell the angels and the ascended master and the entities that they do not belong there, that they do not have your permission, and that they cannot stay, that they have to go. And then tell the angels, please take this entity, remove it in a way that is safe for me, safe for people around me, safe for Peter, and bring it into the light, which is its true home. And then part two, which you deploy at this, it's kind of the same time, is you say to the entity, although you have to leave here, you will discover when you go with the angels and you get to the light, that is your true home. You will be greeted by people who loved you in your lifetime. And if you combine forcefulness with compassion, you get the best results. When you only use force, the more frightened that entity is, the more it's going to hold on for dear life. And you're going to have to tear it out of there, which is much, much, much harder and takes much, 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 much longer. Now, to give you an example of a real life case of this with one of my clients that will really help illustrate especially the compassionate part, and it will also illustrate an obstacle to removing an entity, because that's the next thing I wanted to talk about. The biggest obstacle to removing an entity, in my experience, now this is just me talking, just my experience, is when the client, when you, on some level, do not want to let that entity go. Now, it could be somebody that you loved in this lifetime. It could be someone that you loved in a past lifetime. It could be someone you feel sorry for. So in this case that I'm about to tell you, I was working with this man, middle-aged. We found out by using a pendulum and then confirming it with his spirit guide that he had a spiritual entity attached to him. That it happened when his second child was born in the hospital. And he traced earlier on, in earlier sessions, the beginning of anxiety to when his daughter was born. That was his second child. Didn't happen when the first was born, happened when the second was born. Check this out. Who attached to him? A young girl, like a 3 or 4-year-old girl, who died in that hospital, attached to him because he looked like a father, because he was a father, because he seemed loving. And I don't know if he was vulnerable at that moment because he was in an emotional state, maybe of fear about the birth of his child. But this being that attached to him wasn't a monster. You know, it wasn't a mean person in their lifetime. It was like a 3-year-old child that was terrified and was holding on to someone that seemed safe to her. And her anxiety about the circumstances of her death and not going into the light and being alone seems to have translated itself into some of his anxiety. And we wouldn't want to tear a 3-year-old who's already scared out of the energy field of the client. So we treated her, especially when we found out it was a 3-year-old child, we went way down on the forcefulness and way up on the compassion. And what we did is we asked for someone who loved her from the other side to come and receive her and escort her with the angels back into the light. Now the client didn't understand why he was reluctant to let the entity go. Because at that point, we didn't know that it was a 3-year-old child that he had acquired in the hospital. He just knew, and in his case, I think he had 3 entities. The first 2 went pretty easily, and he's like, there's a third one, and he started crying, and he's like, I don't know why, I just don't want to let it go. That's when we asked his guide, who is this entity? And that's when they told us it's a 3-year-old child. And we said, did this happen in the hospital when his wife was giving birth to his second child? Yes. Is this a child? Yes. Is the child younger than 10 years old? Yes. Younger than 5 years old? Yes. 4? No. 3? Yes. Once we knew that, he knew why he was feeling this attachment to her, to this 3-year-old child that he had never met. And we knew, I knew at least, what we needed to do to let her go. So we had to have someone who loved her come from the other side. Then we had to have the client ask the Ascended Master and his guide, is it in the highest and best interest of this entity to go with this person who loves them into the light? Answer, yes. Is it in your highest and best interest? Answer, yes. And then he was able to let her go with tears streaming down. So again, the most intense obstacles I have ever encountered with helping people move spiritual entities out and on is when they, the client, have a powerful connection, call it an attachment, to the attachment. And we have to untangle that. And if you're just using force, it's going to be really long, it's going to be really nasty, and it may not work. So I hope all of that kind of makes sense. And I'm going to look over at the comments and see if we've got anything here. Crystal Gonzalez. Can an attachment move through generations? For example, from me to my children and to their children. Well, yeah, theoretically they could. Theoretically they could. You know, that's something that you might want to use your pendulum and determine if this is what has happened. But yeah, in my experience, that could happen. You know, I talked about how in people who are intimate with each other, it can pass. Well, I would think that living in the same household, it could probably pass, especially when you're really close to people. You know, you're not intimate with them, but you're living in close proximity and you are going through all kinds of emotions with each other. So yeah, I think that could happen. Absolutely. Thanks for the question. Stacy Rain says, why Tesla? Okay, so Tesla, it's not just my opinion. Everyone I've read that talks about him being really the genius of the 20th century. That a lot of the inventions, like he came up with the alternating current, from direct current to alternating current, and that's what we all use now. So many inventions that this guy came up with was just absolutely brilliant. And like Einstein, he was seeking to pierce more and more layers of reality. And so when he says, if you want to understand the nature of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And if you combine that with the more recent science of quantum physics and how that really is the cutting edge of understanding our universe, I can think of no better person than Tesla to help guide me in terms of my own understanding of these phenomena. Here's Doreen. Hey, welcome back, Doreen. You get a triangle too. Yes, Dr. Eben Alexander, a neurosurgeon, author, Proof of Heaven. Before his near-death experience, he was a neurosurgeon. He wasn't religious. He got meningitis, went into a coma. He had an NDE, and now he's a firm believer. He is an awesome person to bring this message to the world, because as a neurosurgeon, as an MD, he is a scientist. And a lot of people will talk about how science is kind of our new religion. And one of the things that I heard a scientist say once that I thought was so interesting is, give me one miracle and I can describe anything. So for example, if you talk to a scientist about, well, how did the universe form? They'll say, well, there was a big bang. And you're like, wow, cool, big bang, like a huge explosion. Yeah, big bang. Well, what caused the big bang? And what was there before the big bang, if that's what created the universe? And that's where things kind of fall apart. So there's a bit of faith. As the scientist said, give me one miracle and it can describe anything. That's kind of what I was thinking about when Legal Eel 44 was talking about some scientists will say, well, it's just the death throes of the brain that create the near-death experience. And I think, well, that's kind of miracle-y if you don't really have a scientific explanation and you throw something else in there. Okay, maybe. I don't think so, but maybe. So yeah. Dr. Eben, that's E-B-E-N, Alexander. Highly recommend you guys, if you're interested in this, go onto YouTube and just type his name in and just listen to him talk. He says he wouldn't believe someone who came to him with this story before he had his experience. And once he had his experience, it was like, boom, mind blown, and he's in a totally different realm and he wants people to understand this. I think that a near-death experience, I think that many of the hypnotic journeys that people go on when I'm working with them are very similar to what you hear about with hallucinogenic experiences. DMT, ayahuasca, LSD, and I'm not advocating anyone do this. I've never actually done it myself, but I think what happens with a hallucinogenic journey and what happens in near death and what happens oftentimes with a hypnotic journey is that the curtain is parted. So in other words, these trips aren't manufactured, they are revealed. That's my belief. I have no proof of that. That's just my belief. And I think even Alexander, with his near-death experience, had a larger scope of reality revealed to him. Now, I've quoted this statistic before on this channel, on these Friday Lives, and I think it bears repeating. You and I, if you're not blind, if you have eyesight, physical eyesight, you see a component of the light spectrum. Lots of different kinds of light that make up the light spectrum. You and I see with our eyeballs visible light. And if you Google what percentage of the light spectrum is comprised of visible light, you'll blow your mind. I'll do it for you. The answer is 0.0035. That's it. And so we run around on the crust of this tiny little planet in the corner of a little galaxy in a universe so big we can't understand it. And we say, oh yeah, that's true, that's false, this guy's crazy, that person thinks they can talk to trees, they're a nut, there's no such thing as ghosts, there's no such thing as near-death experience. Come on, man. Really? We're exploring reality in our science with our 5 physical senses. Yeah, we have aids to them. We have machines to aid us, but the point remains that we have a very, very, very limited awareness of the larger reality. And in Shakespeare's Hamlet, he has Hamlet say, I will bind myself inside a walnut shell and call myself master of all I survey. I think that's where we are right now. And I think when we die, that we bust out of that walnut shell. And before we're born, we're coming from a place that's so much bigger than the walnut shell into which we pack ourselves over time. So I hope that makes sense. And Doreen, thank you for raising Eben Alexander's name. He's as I say, a huge addition to this whole field of inquiry, and deeply appreciate what he has done, and the fact that you brought him up, again, really kind of proves that point earlier, that with interaction, this becomes way more interesting than if I'm just talking to the camera. Okay. Let's see here. I'm just going to jump into this one, even though I can't read it yet. Okay, it's Doreen again. Started life here. Earth is pale next to where we are all going. Great book. Eben Alexander again. This kind of reminds me of a podcast I was listening to about 5 weeks ago. There's a guy named Dr. Zach Bush. Dr. Zach Bush. And he is one of the most brilliant people I have ever heard. And he was trained in, I think, 3 different disciplines as an MD. One of them was, he was a hospice doctor. And he was giving this description of life, what we call life and what we call death, from a scientific, but also from like a poetic. It was like he was delivering it as poetry. And he was talking about being born, about how right before you're born, when you're in your mother's womb, if the light is bright enough, you can see light through the tissue of your mother's skin. How you can hear the tone and quality of her voice, how you can hear her heartbeat, how this womb becomes your whole universe. And then one day, everything changes. Everything starts to squeeze in on you, and your heartbeat shoots up to 180 beats per minute. Everything goes dark, and you become terrified as you go through this tunnel, because everything that you have known seems to be collapsing, seems to be coming to an end, and it feels like you're dying. And right at the worst moment, you burst out into the light. and you look around at a world that is more beautiful than you could have possibly imagined. You can't fathom it. You can see every filament of hair on your mother's head. She's smiling at you. You hear the sound of her voice. You feel skin on skin as she puts you to her breast. And then he combines this with when you're dying. You feel like your whole world is closing in on you. Your heartbeat shoots up to 180 beats per minute. You can't breathe very well, and you feel like everything that you have known is ending as you're going through a dark tunnel. And all of a sudden you burst out into the light, into the most beautiful place you could possibly imagine, filled with love. I find this so exciting, so empowering. So if any of you are interested in this, Dr. Eben Alexander, as Doreen Grannon talked about, and Dr. Zach Bush is another person who speaks so eloquently, because he can talk equally as facile with medicine and science as he can with spirituality and philosophy. And he fuses these things together through his education and through his experience, again, in hospice with people dying, and in other settings, helping moms give birth to their babies. Absolutely incredible. Thanks for bearing with me on that one. Bounty Woman. How can you get rid of negative energies someone sends you? Someone that makes you feel possessed or hooked. Okay, so the first thing that I would talk about or use as my answer is to come back to what I said before about energy, frequency, and vibration. Negative energies are only going to resonate with a home that is also resonating at that frequency, right? There could be music that I absolutely hate on my truck radio dial. Let's say that music that I absolutely hate is on 96.9 on FM. Hate it, can't stand it, drives me nuts. I start feeling depressed and angry and upset and blah, 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 blah. Well, if I change the frequency on the radio in my truck to 107.7, I'm going to hear something else entirely. So I'm not trying to say I have the last word on this. I don't. I'm just giving you my experience and my opinion. And my opinion is the most powerful thing you can do is you can raise your frequency. And honestly, I feel like this is what's behind when people will, hang a crucifix in their room or in their house, or they'll have rosary beads, or they'll have a picture of an ascended master. And I was raised as a Christian, so this is kind of what I know. But something, either a talisman or a symbol or a photograph or a picture or something that represents a very high frequency. I think it's the same thing with essential oils, with crystals. I think it's the same thing with the music you listen to, with the movies that you watch, with the food that you eat, with your daily spiritual practice. Now, most people don't have one. And I say that, most of us have a smartphone. What's the one thing you have to do with a smartphone every day? Every single day, you have to do this one thing with your smartphone. Right. You have to plug it in. And what do you plug it into? You plug it in to its source of power. Because without that power, those batteries are going to get depleted. And when they're depleted and when it goes down to zero, your expensive smartphone will be an expensive paperweight. It has no value. And I say, what are you doing? What am I doing to plug myself into my source of power, to raise up my frequency, to charge my batteries so I can go out into the world and be more effective at my work? More effective when I work out, more effective with my friends, more effective with my family, more present. And I'm by far, I'm not trying to say I'm perfect. I am not. But I think that this is a big, big, big piece. So my biggest answer to you is like Tesla. Think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Negative energy, by definition, is going to be a low frequency. It's going to be vibrating at the level of fear, of hatred, of resentment, of a state of unforgiveness, of lying, of cheating, of stealing. And if you're vibrating at a higher frequency, you are not going to be an energetic match for that stuff. When I was being trained in hypnotherapy in 2006, one of the cool discussions or demonstrations that was given to us, excuse me one second, is they brought in tuning forks. You know, a musical tuning fork looks like that. It's got a rubber stopper at one end. And they took a tuning fork tuned to the note of A, and you hit the rubber stopper against the wall, and then press the rubber stopper against the wall, and you can hear the tuning fork vibrating at the frequency of A, right? Makes a vibration that we hear as a sound. They took another tuning fork, also tuned to the note of A. They did not hit it against the wall. They just placed it against the first one that was already vibrating. And the second one now started vibrating at the same frequency of A because they're vibrating in harmony. Same experiment, but this time tuning fork tuned to A, and now they get a second tuning fork tuned to C. A is vibrating at A, they put C up against A, and what happens? Nothing happens. Because it's not tuned to the same frequency. It doesn't harmonize with a frequency that it's not designed to harmonize with. And this was shown to us as a way of describing how as you raise your own frequency, you become an energetic match to other things that are vibrating at that same high frequency. If your frequency is low, you will be an energetic match to everything vibrating at that low frequency, including things other people send you. So I really think, I'm not saying that surrounding yourself with white light, calling in protection is a bad idea. I think it's a good idea. You know, putting beautiful things in your home, all a good idea. But what does that do? It's helping to raise your frequency. And I would say through your own spiritual practice, you can do that by plugging yourself into your own source of power. So, super long answer. Hope it made sense. Thank you for asking. Let's see where we are here. Here we go. Marie Hogan. Hi, Marie. So meditation, music, Tai Chi, etc. would be positive ways, perhaps, to keep these spirit attachments away. I would say yes, absolutely, absolutely. I really think that the best defense, I mean, it is said in military theory that the best defense is a really good offense. So in a sense, by raising your frequency, you are creating what I think, the way I look at this, a very, very powerful defense, but you're also creating a really good offense, if you will, because now you're sending that higher frequency energy into the world. And you're going to be more likely to draw people, circumstances, situations, things, and opportunities to you that are vibrating at that same high frequency. So I think our job, my job, your job, is to achieve and maintain that high level of vibration. Now, can you do that all the time? No, because we're human beings. Things happen. But through discipline, like you were saying, Tai Chi, yoga, meditation, have these daily practices. That's an awesome way to raise and keep your vibration up there. I think of it as filling up your batteries. Then it would be the food you eat, how much sleep you get, are you exposing yourself to toxins, poisons? What are you putting on your skin? What are you putting in through your eyes and your ears? Doesn't mean you can never eat a Twinkie. You just don't live on them. It doesn't mean you can't watch, certain kinds of movies. Although personally, I don't see why I would ever want to watch a scary or a horror movie. To me, that's just pure toxic crap that I don't want in my psyche. I don't want it in my spirit. But keep all of those things in mind. Make sure you exercise. Make sure you get out in the sun. I mean, my goodness, the sun is the highest vibration we know. So yeah, really good point, Marie. Thank you for making that. Just want to see where we are. Time, got a few more minutes to take a few more questions. And before I do that, I would like to talk just briefly about next week. So I'm going to do next week on something I call the soul of money. I've done this as a class, in-person class, and I want to talk about this because there's really three main areas as far as I'm concerned. This is how I see it. There are three main areas to your life. There is your health. So that would be your physical health, your mental, emotional, maybe your spiritual health. So there's health. The second one is relationships. This would be significant other. It would be your children. It would be your friends. It would be the people you work with. It would be your neighbors. It would be your clients. And then the third area would be, largely speaking, money. So that would be your business. It would be your finances. It would be your investments. It would be paying bills and doing the things you want to do and so forth. And so I thought, all right, it's time to tackle that area because a lot of us are either struggling now or have struggled in the past. And most of us want to be able to live a life of abundance in all three of those areas. So I'm going to be talking about that next Friday at 5, and I hope you guys will consider joining me for that. And remember to subscribe if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, and I'll dive back in here to some more comments and questions. Looks like We Are One is talking about Bounty Woman, raising your vibrations so it can't affect you. It's like voodoo, it only works if you believe in it. So We Are One looks like he or she took the same kind of tack I did about raising that vibration. I think that's super, super important. You don't want to be an energetic match to what you don't want. You want to be an energetic match to what you do want. And I'm going to be doing a Friday live on forgiveness at some point in the future. I can't remember how many weeks out it is, but I'm going to be doing one on forgiveness. And one of the beauties of forgiveness, which is really ancient wisdom, is you disconnect from the person with whom you have this state of animosity that created the state of non-forgiveness in the first place. Now that may be because they did something to you, or it may be because you did something to them. And forgiveness releases both of you from these handcuffs of pain. Now think of a person whom you are upset with that you don't want to forgive. Every time you think of that person, you're likely to feel some kind of psychological or even physical pain because you're handcuffed to them through the past and through painful things that happened in the past. That painful experience or experiences that the two of you share is actually dragging your vibration down. And when you forgive them, or you are forgiven by them by apologizing, you take off the handcuffs and you're not dragged down anymore. You can rise up higher. And we know that everything that we really want in life, which is health and beauty and fitness and energy and money and abundance and joy and friendships and so forth, they're all products of this higher vibration. So yeah, I agree with Bounty Woman. MH, wow, free will really comes into play in these strange times we are in. Yes. Yes. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Yep. Thanks for making that observation. And I don't want to go further into that because I try to stay away from politics. Let's see here. Scrolling down. Dara says, I heard in the celery juice guy's book, ask the unknown angels for help as they are not busy because they are unknown. Okay. All right. I'll give you my impression on this one. Tell me what you think, or let me know what you think. I grew up Catholic, and then my parents got divorced, and so after that it was part Methodist and part Catholic, sort of depending on what side of the family I was with as a kid coming up. And somewhere along the way I got this idea, this belief that they, the ascended masters and the angels, are too busy to be bothered with my petty stuff. And that if I go to them, it better be pretty damn important. Well, that's not my experience. And now this is working with hundreds, probably over 1,000 clients over the last 14 years, that they're never too busy. When people have near-death experiences, one of the things that they talk about, there's an awesome book called Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani, Moorjani. And when she was having her near-death experience, she simultaneously had an awareness, like she was present with her brother who was flying on a plane from another country to be with her because she was dying, and with her parents who were coming from somewhere else to be with her because she was dying, and she was simultaneously with her husband who was back in their house with their little kids. In other words, she was in multiple places at the same time, which I think is consistent with what we're talking about with quantum physics. So my retort to you, I guess, would be my experience is that you don't have to get a quote unquote lesser angel, whatever that is, because the other ones are too busy. They're not too busy. My understanding and my experience is that they can be in multiple places simultaneously because we're all operating in a quantum universe. We're having a very unique and limited experience here on this planet that causes us to feel like, well, you can only do one thing at a time. Well, that's because we're physical. If you're non-physical, it changes that equation substantially. So that's important to recognize, I think, that we're not bothering them by earnestly and honestly asking for assistance or help or insight or guidance or wisdom. My experience is that they're not going to do anything for us. We're the actor. We're the one that has to take action. They're like a coach in a football game. We're the ones that have to run out onto the field. But the coach or the coaches can be of significant assistance in a variety of different ways. Right? Your emotional and mental state, helping you to refocus on something, giving you insight that helps you overcome an obstacle, giving you encouragement, loving you. Cool. Let's do one more here. You can tell I love to do this, right? Like every Friday, I feel like I'm sort of prying myself away at this time. I originally thought I'm going to do 1 hour. And every week I always go over. So thank you for bearing with me. Sage Universe. I don't know what you wrote, but I love that name. Very strange to hear people not really trained in these things for any real length of time speak of these things. Okay, all right. So Sage, you might be talking about me. I'm not sure, but appreciate your point of view. And as I made clear I think earlier in this live, that everything that I'm talking about, 90%, is coming from my experience over 14 years. This is what I have found working with scores and scores and scores of people who didn't know each other, who didn't necessarily read the books, who all were largely coming to the same place, having the same experience. To me, that's enormously powerful. So appreciate your point of view. Hope you appreciate mine, and thanks for showing up. Do one more here. Okay, Shorty Love. How do you know you have a spiritual attachment? Great question. So when I suspect that there's a spiritual attachment, remember I talked about drug addiction, alcohol addiction, depression for a long period of time, maybe a romantic involvement with somebody who was super unstable. Maybe they had a drug and alcohol addiction. The first step is we would use a pendulum. And I have a video here on my YouTube channel that'll teach you all about how to use a pendulum so that you can use it for yourself. That's the first step. Does the pendulum, the ideomotor response, indicate an attachment? Now, it could be one attachment, it could be 2, it could be 20, it could be more. I've actually seen more than that, which is kind of strange. Once we get that, the next step is we go into hypnosis, the client meets with their spirit guide, or they meet with an ascended master. Have the client then ask the spirit guide, is it true that I have spiritual attachments? So we're getting kind of a two-step thing. And then 3 is when we move them out, client generally feels that attachment leaving. And when it's gone, they generally feel a sense of lightness. Again, you know, to check this out a little bit further, you could go to my part 1 and part 2 series on removing spiritual attachments and just read in the comment section. There are people in the comment section talking about how great they feel after they went through this process. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for your comments. You know, obviously I can't get to all of them, but I really appreciate it. And I do read all of them afterwards. And it certainly helps to inform the kind of content that I'm making for my channel. It helps to inform, you know, upcoming broadcasts. People are writing to me suggesting things for content. That's really helpful. And when I see the same thing coming up a few times, or I see something, I'm like, yeah, we definitely need to do that. I hadn't thought about it. Or I see something come in 3 or 4 times, I think, all right, it's time to do something on that. So thank you for your participation, and have a wonderful weekend, and look forward to seeing you here next Friday, live at 5 Eastern. Take care. Bye.